I'm Neil Oliver, presenter of BBC Scotland's A History of Scotland series. One of the most distinctive features of the programmes, aside from their epic theme and the awesome landscapes, has been their original music soundtrack. This was written by BAFTA-winning Scottish-based composer Paul Leonard-Morgan, and I've come to visit him in his Glasgow studio. Paul, what are we looking at here?
Well, you're surrounded by a whole load of screens, some mixing desks, about 3-4 computers, a big plasma screen on the wall there, so that's where your image will be projected onto. So when I'm looking at History of Scotland, for example, I'll be looking at the pictures there and writing all the music with these keyboards and the sounds around me.
So are you as dependent upon this kind of computer-based technology as you are upon a keyboard or any other pieces that I would recognise as a musical instrument?
You're massively dependent, but it all depends on what the soundtrack is. History of Scotland is a great big orchestral soundtrack, and when we spoke about it, we decided that we wanted it to be a big orchestra. But at the same time, I can't just go and write it on the piano and say to the director, this is what your tune's going to sound like. So you've got to go away and give them examples of all the different music and how it'll actually sound.
When someone calls you and says, we've got an idea for a series telling the whole of Scotland's history in 10 parts, and we want you to compose the music, when you put the phone down on that call, what is the first thing that you do to start that job?
You have fear. You have fear that you're going to come up with enough tunes, that you're going to come up with the right tunes. I think it's the same in any creative industry. You get to a certain point where you think, have I written my best tune? Is there more to come? Am I going to get the right tunes? Something that's going to really help this production really blossom.
And do they literally put the ball in your court? Do they say, we're expecting to hear music that we will think is appropriate? Or do they tell you what it should sound like?
Again, it's very dependent on what project it is. For the History of Scotland project, it was me, and it was Richard Downes, the producer, and it was Neil MacDonald, the executive producer, and we discussed what we actually wanted to achieve with the whole music for it. Over the space of 10 episodes, 10 1-hours, we had to cover thousands of years, as you know, and it was really then a kind of learning curve. We didn't want it to be a big, typical tartan soundtrack, which is all the Hollywood guys would have. It was going to be a big orchestral soundtrack, but we didn't want it to be really twee Scottish. We wanted it to avoid all the kind of typical bagpipe music that you would have, and have music which really helps with the atmos. And if you think back to 2,000-3,000 years ago, bagpipes weren't even invented until 200-250 years ago. So you're trying to find all the different drums that they used to have, goat skin on the drums, and suddenly realising that in actual fact it's quite Aboriginal in sound.
Do you remember the first piece of music that came to you in the aftermath of being asked to compose for A History of Scotland?
I remember we'd sat down here, exactly where you're sitting now, and we'd had this chat, and we'd discussed some different stuff that I'd done. They'd heard some of my soundtracks that I'd written, really liked the style of it, and said, well, would it be possible to adapt it? And I said, well, there's no point adapting it. You should come up with something. This is such a unique project. We should come up with a really unique soundtrack to it. And I remember I just went for a walk in the local park, in Kelvingrove Park, and you're there, and 1 minute it's sunny and the next it's raining, and I thought, well, that's typical Scotland to begin with, and just coming up with some different ideas. And then I came back, probably after a couple of days sort of going around, and you're just thinking, mulling over the subject matter the whole time, and you come and start just playing away on the piano. And in actual fact, the first theme that I came up with was the one that we used for Mary Queen of Scots, because in my head I wasn't thinking about any particular part of the programme at all, I was just thinking about the general subject matter. And I hadn't seen any of the visuals. I just knew should have a Scottish twinge, but not too much. And I started writing some stuff down and came up with some different themes. The producer came in and I played them to Richard, and he said, that's absolutely beautiful. It's not right for the main theme, it's too Scottish. But he said, I think that will work really well in a couple of the episodes. And as I say, a couple of episodes later, when Mary Queen of Scots comes along, it's like, that is it. That is her theme. That's fantastic.
What is that music? Can you let me hear that music, which was a very early creation?
Sure. I mean, I can play it on the piano if you want.
Yeah.
And then you kind of think, well, experiment a bit more. Picture this big orchestral climax coming on, and of course I'm then singing it away to the producer going la 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 la. He's looking at me like I'm a madman. And then when you actually get the orchestra on it, and I'd said to him, well, as it's Mary Queen of Scots, this is the one moment when I thought we could have a real Celtic feel to it, so we put on Tim Whistle over the top of it. We got Mark Duff, amazing player, he used to be in Capercaillie, And it's all the different elements helps kind of really rouse it, I feel.
For me, a non-musical person, I'm fascinated by how you can have an identity that's instantly recognisable. In the same way that if someone plays you music from a Western movie,
Yep.
there are signature elements where you know without seeing any pictures that you're going to watch a Western now. And similarly there, that just is permeated throughout with Scottishness.
But I think it's not just to do with the instrumentation, it's to do with the chords that you use, it's to do with the chord changes, it's to do with, they used to use modes in those days, it's just different scales that you use to write music in. And there's just something about it, for me, the whole Celtic music, it sends shivers up your spine sometimes. It can be very haunting, but it can also, it's just so emotional and can really move you.
If that was, or became, Mary Queen of Scots' theme,
Yep.
William Wallace's theme is quite different. What led you to his musical identity?
Well, apart from the fact that I'm related to him many, many, many years ago, apparently, we spoke again about Wallace and what we wanted to achieve with it, and we didn't want to go down the Braveheart route. We thought it's been done, apart from the fact it's kind of playing with a bit of artistic license, amazing film as it was, we wanted to steer clear of that whole tartan vibe again. So we thought, well, okay, well, here is a man, the myth, the legend. Here is a guy that has inspired many. It was also quite a dark side to his character. So we wanted to try and achieve something which felt, at that time, there were so many battles, so many tribal kind of feels going on, that we wanted to come up with I suppose something that made you feel, God, that guy, he's fought for so much. He actually died, and at his time he didn't achieve that much, but it's in the years to come that he has actually achieved that. So it had to have a twinge of sadness in it as well, but it was a very heroic feel.